Hi everyone, it's William with the Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series. It's always a little doubtful whenever I'm inside the house that I'll be able to go on without distraction or disturbance of some kind, especially with my two dogs, but we're going to give it a try. So, I also have a bit of news. I've been doing a little research on optimizing things on YouTube, and I guess I've been posting too many of these, and maybe those of you who are watching them faithfully, for which I thank you, are finding it difficult to keep up. And they are chronologically sensitive. So I'm told that the optimal thing is to post one or two a week, one midweek and one, for instance, on Saturday. So that's what I plan to be doing. So the next one after this would be on Saturday, and we'll see how that goes. I'm always open to feedback from all of you. All right, so our recap from we're finishing up with this longish diary entry from Sunday, the 1st October, 1917. So we're going to do the last part of that today, even though it's kind of jam-packed. And in the previous half, we had the arrival of Boris Hartmann, who'd been the commander of Dmitri's regiment, the Horse Guards regiment, and then after the revolution had moved to Central Asia. And I can't remember the name of the corps that he was in charge of, a cavalry corps in Central Asia, and he made his way for 3 days to Tehran to check the place out and to visit Dmitri. So he had a letter from his wife that talked about this whole marriage phenomena in back home in Russia, young people rushing to get married, amongst whom was Dmitri's sister, Maria. And he talks about the German attempt, at that time it was an ongoing attempt, to seize these two islands off of Estonia that would give them, put them within striking distance of Petrograd. So they did take the islands, but they did not ever manage to take Petrograd. All right, so let's get started. Speaking of the government, the coalition cabinet was formed of representatives of the Democrats and qualified voters, the propertied elements. The question of a pre-parliament was then decided, but it's still not known who will be part of it. I don't understand what will now become of the Duma, which, strictly speaking, cannot be dissolved until the Constituent Assembly. But now it is already no longer enjoying popularity among the current political activists because it seems representative only of the qualified classes, and consequently the Democrats don't have sufficient strength and voice there. He puts Democrats in parentheses, not in parentheses, sorry, in quotation marks. Okay. The most fantastic, bizarre rumors are circulating in Tehran, to wit, that General Kornilov made a ceremonial entry into Petrograd, and is staying at the Winter Palace. Naturally, that cannot be, but often the Persians pass along things that do have some basis. In Reuters, there is information that Nicky and his family have moved out of the governor's house in Tobolsk at their own request and taken up residence in a neighboring monastery because they were very much bothered by the curiosity of the crowd! In one of the latest issues of Illustration received here, there is a photograph of poor Nicky with guards in the Tsarskaya Selo Park. I am attaching that photograph here because it's such a sad contrast with my diary of a year ago. There I had placed a photograph of our excursion along the Dnieper to Mogilyov. How little we could have imagined what things would be like in a year. But meanwhile, there were already various threatening symptoms from which one might have concluded that all was not well. But Nicky didn't want to see anything. I will never forget how, after my last turn of duty at Stavka in November 1916, when I was already back in Petrograd, Nicky sent Sablin to me to say that he had noticed my dejected state and had asked Soblin to pass along to me that all this was nonsense and everything would settle down. Naturally, this photograph is blank, but one can judge from it how old and haggard poor Nicky has become. Beneath the photograph was an inscription, which I have copied here. He then attaches the photo and writes, La prisonnier di Tsarskaya Selo. I should just say that when I said blank, that was a missing word. The photograph itself, of course, is not blank. Otherwise, it would be pointless. All right. Now a few words about my life here. Sunday, 24th September, was the second day of the Tehran races in the Derby, which was won by a Swede, Harvidsson. It was quite lively and fun. Incidentally, Meidel suggested that I should consider becoming an instructor in the brigade. At first I liked the idea, but then I decided to set it aside for a while. As Hartman says, it would be selling myself short. Colonel Staroselsky also encouraged me to become an instructor. He says a lot in general, but apparently diverges from the truth fairly often. Okay, so yeah, maybe that was a little overambitious of me, so lots to unpack. So he talks about 4 institutions, governing institutions: the coalition cabinet, the pre-parliament, the constituent assembly, and the Duma. So the Duma had been sidelined, very much so. As Dmitri says, it still existed, but it wasn't really contributing anything. The coalition cabinet, so Kerensky's cabinet, was made up of qualified, so people from the educated classes, not the laborers and peasants and soldiers. And so, yeah, there was pushback against that, not surprisingly. And in addition to the cabinet, there was this pre-parliament. So I did some research with that, and I'm quoting from Perplexity AI. A pre-parliament, also called the Democratic Council, was established as an advisory body to broaden support behind the provisional government. However, left-wing parties, especially the Bolsheviks, viewed this as an attempt to stall the promised Constituent Assembly and exclude the working class and soldiers. The body was criticized for being dominated by qualified classes, in quotes, landowners, bourgeoisie, professionals, rather than true representatives of worker and peasant interests. So the same as the cabinet. The Constituent Assembly was, from the beginning, what the provisional government, hence the name provisional, had said was really going to decide what form of government Russia would have. So there would be elections of everyone, I think even women, or maybe not. Maybe it was universal male suffrage, but maybe it was women. But anyway, that they would choose, the people would choose the delegates to the Constituent Assembly, and that would decide things. In fact, Grand Duke Nikolai Mikhailovich very much wanted to run for the Constituent Assembly, and he wasn't allowed to. So, yeah, those are the things that Dmitri is talking about. And he's quite right that this was a big problem, that Kerensky's government was really pinned to the wall by the fact that they had to thread this impossible middle ground between conservatives and the left wing, and we are just 3 weeks away from the Bolshevik Revolution. So things are going downhill fast. Okay, now on the more right-wing side of things, rumors that Kornilov had actually, instead of being arrested, that he'd reappeared, and not only that, but he'd entered Petrograd triumphantly, moved into the Winter Palace, and was now in charge. And, pretty far-fetched, and not true, of course. So what Dmitri calls bizarre rumors, the newspapers weren't saying it, but these rumors were really rife. And, it's one of those instances in Russian history and in the history of other nations where people insist that someone who's been imprisoned or someone who's been killed is actually alive and well. In this case, there was not a false Kornilov. There was nobody pretending to be Kornilov. Okay, and then we go on to this very famous photo of Nicholas. I'm sure you've all seen it, if you have more than a passing interest in the Romanovs and in Nicholas II. One of the most famous photos of him in captivity. Before he and the family had been moved east, they were there under arrest at at the Alexander Palace in Tsarskaya Selo. So there's a famous photo of Nicholas sitting on a tree stump. I had to crop it in order to fit it in as the thumbnail. But it's very interesting that we have Dmitri's comments on some of these more famous photos. Less famous, but still public and out there, are the photos of him on this excursion, this river excursion on a small boat that he refers to. Him and Nicholas and I think Olga in most of the photographs. I don't know if they were the only ones on the trip, but even though it's 1916 and things aren't going well, they're looking very relaxed, all three of them, and obviously having fun. So he's contrasting those photos, and I have some of those, so it was a question of what should I use for the thumbnail, the famous Nicholas photo or one of these river excursion photos. And I decided, since Dmitri was reacting primarily to this photo of Nicholas, that I would use that one for the thumbnail. But, anyway, I think his reaction is the same as anyone else's would be. Even people who don't know Nicholas look at that photograph and compare it to other photographs and think, my God, this guy he looks horrible. He looks aged, he looks haggard, he's got these puffy edema under his eyes and deep lines in his face. So obviously not in a good state of mind, struggling. And so, yeah, what this photograph does to Dmitri is it makes him think about, how this could have been avoided, I guess. What happened to bring this about? Nicholas's ignorance, and his insistence across the board that, all this nonsense is simply going to die out. How does Dmitri put it? All this was nonsense and everything would settle down. Okay, famous last words, right? And Dmitri certainly knew that wasn't the way things were going to work out, and hence his dejection, his depression. Nicholas noticed it when Dmitri was at Stavka and actually sent someone, this man who'd kind of been asked to be a sort of mentor to Dmitri, a naval officer, Nikolai Sablin. So, Dmitri's depression and worry had been so pronounced that Nicholas sent Sablin to Petrograd to deliver this message. Don't worry, everything's fine. And, Dmitri was intelligent enough to know that wasn't true. Okay, and then we end with the Persian Cossack division. Dmitri always calls it the Persian Cossack Brigade. A division is much bigger than a brigade. A division consists of brigades. Taking a cursory glance online, I saw that a brigade is usually about 5,000 men, whereas a division will be between 10,000 and 25,000. So yeah, quite a difference, even with the lower number. So I'm not sure why Dmitri calls it a brigade, but he's had this suggestion that he should become an instructor in the brigade. He's gotten to know and is getting to know a lot of people in the brigade. The men were Persian, and the officers and instructors were Russian, and they were probably all called instructors because, here they are, they're active duty Russian officers, but they're in another country that is not a part of Russia, so they take the name instructors as foreigners. And so basically it's been suggested that he should join the brigade as an officer, the division as an officer. And one of the people who suggested this is a very important man, Vsevolod Dmitrievich Staroselsky, and at that time he was only the second in command, in the second or third in command of the Cossack division. He had, before the revolution, been the commander of the Tatar regiment within the Savage division, Grand Duke Mikhail Alexandrovich's, Michael's division that he commanded. And after the revolution, like Hartmann, he left European Russia and went east all the way across the border into Persia and became an officer, a commanding officer in the Persian Cossack division. And he was kind of a schemer. He was an ambitious man, and he would end up taking over. There would be there would be all kinds of infighting and intrigues that Dmitri will be talking about later in his diaries, and Staroselsky would end up on top. And not only that, but he would be one of the most important figures in the bringing about of a revolution within Persia that would depose the Qajar dynasty. Usually it's spelled Qajar, and bring a corporal or a sergeant, I think, from the Persian Cossack brigade, not only to the head of government, but to enthronement as the new Shah, establishing a new dynasty, not a very long-lived one. So this was Reza Shah Pahlavi. And yeah, he started out as a sergeant in the Persian Cossack division, and he ended up as a sovereign. And Staroselsky was a very important part of that. I had a brief exchange many years ago with Staroselsky's niece, who at that time at least was living in Paris. And Staroselsky himself hadn't had any children. And the niece didn't know him very well, but she told me some interesting things about him, and unfortunately that he hadn't left any memoirs or papers. That was the main thing, so that was disappointing, but I was glad to have a chance to meet her, as it were. So what do we have next time? Before I go on to that, I want to talk about what Hartmann's advice was to Dmitri, which is don't do it. This is small potatoes. So, that's interesting. How did he put it? Don't sell yourself short. It's a Russian idiom, so that's not, that's the closest idiom that I chose. It wouldn't necessarily be selling himself short. It would be something to do for a while during this interim period. But, it was a little dodgy because the Persian Cossack division had a political role within the context of the great game. Anyway, what do we have next time? Well, we're going to the day-by-day entries. And so now that Dmitri is in Tehran, we're going to see a lot more socializing, and we're going to see the first time he talks about something that would end up being ruinous for him, which is gambling, card playing and gambling. So come back for that, and I hope to see you probably on Saturday, unless I get to stir crazy and decide to do another one. I really enjoy doing these. But weigh in if you have any comments, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.